The Problem of God: Answering a Skeptic's Challenges to Christianity by Mark Clark. Introduction, page 15. I was raised in a staunch atheist household. We never went to church. We never owned a Bible. We never talked with God. My father was such an ardent atheist that he demanded my mother spell my brother's name, Matthew, with only one T, so as to not be biblical. He then named me Mark. Clearly, he didn't see the irony. I heard about Christianity from the first time at a summer camp when I was 9 years old. I was fascinated by the concept of God. Not enough to make me want to go to church or read my Bible or whatever else religious people did, but I found myself going back to the camp every year, singing songs, meeting new friends, talking about God, then coming home to a very different life. I experimented with drugs at a very young age. A guy from our neighborhood cooked up hash and offered it to a bunch of us kids in the neighborhood. I came back to drugs as a teenager. I partied, got high, and stole money from cars or from purses of my friends' mothers so I could continue to party and get high. A cycle I enjoyed until I bumped up against God again. Then it all changed. My parents divorced when I was 8 years old. Shortly thereafter, I acquired a psychological disorder called Tourette syndrome, which later developed into obsessive-compulsive disorder. So, growing up, I would adopt a habit. I would a face twitch, or swearing randomly to myself for months at a time until another habit came along and replaced it. Because of the obsessive-compulsive disorder, I would superstitiously pound my hands together or smack my face. For instance, because if I didn't do these things, I was convinced something bad would happen to the people around me. If I didn't hit that post 3 times in the airport or tap my foot against the seat, the plane would go down, etc. It all sounds crazy now, but it was the reality for much of my life. To anyone observing, becoming a pastor would have seemed like the last job I'd ever get. People tend not to come to churches when the preacher drops an F-bomb every few minutes. My father was a classic deadbeat dad. He couldn't hold down a job, didn't know how to raise my brother and me, and divided his time between drinking and yelling at football games. He died of lung cancer when I was 15. I never got to say goodbye to him because he never told us he was sick. He was 47 years old. There were 18 people at his funeral. As I stood over his casket, my mind was flooded with questions about God. I was a skeptic then, and in many ways I still am. The longer you're a Christian, the more you come to realize that faith requires skepticism. Believing in one thing means you have to challenge and exclude other things. As G.K. Chesterton once said, "To believe in everything is the same as believing in nothing." I didn't want to believe in everything, that everyone was right about God no matter what their views about him. That seemed weak and absurd. That whole view, now very popular, seemed too convenient, and I am skeptical about convenient things. I had chosen instead, at that point, to believe in nothing. And maybe that's you, a skeptic, a doubter. At some level, it's all of us. Christians don't believe in Thor or Aphrodite, for instance. Christians have varying levels of doubt and skepticism about a lot of things. In the same way, you may not believe in God at all, or you might reject some of the Christian ideas about him. That was me. But I stood in that very lonely funeral home and began to ponder where exactly my father was. I asked myself what I believed about God, humankind, eternity, and morality, about my father. Where did he go? Somewhere? Nowhere? At age 17, a few days from starting to deal drugs myself, I met a guy named Chris. He was a former drug dealer at my school who had become a follower of Jesus and had been totally transformed. I was intrigued by his life, his questions, and his passion for God. We met in woodworking class, and he challenged me to examine my doubts, read the Bible, pray, and think about the implications of what I believed. I knew one of two things would happen if I did that. I would either lose the small amount of faith I had possessed since my days of summer camp, or that faith would explode and come to define me. So I began to research and wrestle with the existence of God scientifically, historically, and philosophically. I had lingering questions about suffering, about evil, and that came from my own experience. My sickness and the loss of my father. I wrestled with the reliability of the Bible, the legitimacy of miracles, and the dark history of the church, filled as it was with judgment, violence, and hypocrisy. I wrestled with the doctrine of hell and how God could allow my father, who to my knowledge never became a Christian, to go to a place of everlasting torment. Since this didn't square with my understanding of justice, love, or Jesus, I set out to explore these things and lean into my doubts rather than away from them. The more I explored, the more I saw the power and soundness of Christianity. I saw science and philosophy were not opposed to faith at all. Historically, Christianity stood apart from other world religions in its legitimacy. Later that year, I gave my life to Christ. After I got serious about following Jesus, there was one step I could not bring myself to take: attending church. It's ironic looking back on this, given that I now spend my life serving and building a church as a pastor. Initially, I was afraid and disinterested in church altogether. I thought it would be an old man up front preaching from a big dusty Bible and building old and smelling like mothballs. The building old and smelling like mothballs. A friend finally convinced me to go, and it was exactly like that. But I stayed anyway. I'm not really sure why. I guess because I found others like me, wrestling in the place where faith and skepticism meet. To have faith in something, I require a certain level of information. Like you, I don't believe every claim that comes my way simply because someone tells me it's true. I want evidence. I have always been that way. It was no different when I came to faith in Christ. Every idea and claim about God or humankind had to have evidence behind it, or I wouldn't accept it. I grew up in an exclusively non-Christian social world, where if you believed something with conviction, you would have to test it so you were able to defend it when challenged. An informed faith rather than an assumed faith. And that is what this book is all about. Starting a church for skeptics. In 2010, when I was 29 years old, I found myself planting a church. How I got to this point is a long story, but the short version is that when I was 19, God called me into pastoral ministry through a series of seemingly disconnected events. I didn't know what that would look like initially, but I started attending a Bible college that worked as an intern in a few different youth ministries, developed a passion for scholarship and philosophy, married my high school sweetheart, and moved to Vancouver to pursue a master's degree in New Testament studies. This move was originally intended as a 3-year stop on my way to doctoral studies at Oxford. The longer we lived in Vancouver, however, the more our hearts stirred for it as a city, and we developed a passion for the local church. While working on my master's thesis, I felt God calling me to start a church that would reach people like me, skeptics who either didn't grow up in the church or who had walked away from it altogether. I wanted to reach people who lived in the real world of television, right at post-secondary institutions that cut their teeth on anti-Christian convictions, and workplaces with colleagues who have never been to church. I wanted to reach people who doubted the existence of God, who thought Christianity was judgmental and narrow-minded, and who spent their time reading Richard Dawkins and Thomas Friedman and the latest Christian bestseller, not the latest Christian bestseller. My wife and I, along with a small team of amazing people, started dreaming of a church where the Bible was taught and at the same time where skeptics and cynics could come, be challenged, ask questions, and maybe even get some answers. We envisioned a place where every week we would talk about God's profound answers to the questions we are all asking in life, the questions that have come to define our post-Christian culture. So that's what we did. It was a risk because Vancouver is the third least church city in Canada, located in the country's most secular province. How does one speak into and reach a culture like that? The best way I had come up with was to do what the Apostle Paul did. He went to strategic areas of his time, Athens, Corinth, Ephesus, Rome, and spoke into the marketplace of ideas, showing how the gospel and the biblical story interfaced with those ideas, interacting with the thinkers and philosophies of the time, and showing how Jesus is the one true God and the center of all things. See Acts 17 through 20. By God's grace, that risk has paid off in ways I never could have imagined. Village Church launched in July 2010 in an elementary school gym with 50 people, and it has since grown to a multi-site church of thousands of people, many of whom are skeptics, unchurched and de-churched people with lots of hang-ups about Christianity, but who are meeting God in powerful ways. The transformation and growth we have seen in every demographic has been beyond our every expectation. That is why I am hopeful. I have seen the answers and evidences we will explore in the coming pages actually change people's lives in amazing and tangible ways. The last time we did a formal sermon series based on the questions raised in this book, our church grew by 800 people in a week. That would be a minor miracle in the Bible Belt of the American South. In Canada, it is unheard of. Why would almost 1,000 people show up at church one Sunday who weren't there the week before? How does a church go from a group of 13 people in a living room to thousands across multiple locations in just a few years? It is a movement of God that we can neither explain nor control. But I think it is also because we are addressing the common questions of the human mind, working to give answers to them, week in and week out, and that is connecting to a sincerely skeptical culture. What's amazing about all of these people finding faith in Jesus is our modern day is this. Years ago, it was theorized that by the time my generation grew up, faith and religion would be dead in the Western world because of the development of technology, science, and human knowledge in general. But this has turned out not to be the case after all. While these developments have certainly changed the conversation, people are not abandoning spiritual questions in the Western world. Rather, they are entering into and welcoming many spiritual experiences that they weren't open to a generation ago. Everyone from Howard Stern to Jim Carrey now claim to meditate and connect to the transcendent. Ace Ventura meditating? I'm not going to lie, I never would have predicted that, but I should have, because spirituality rings true, even virtuous, to people of all ages and stages of life. My desire is to take that conviction and show that that impulse is ultimately meant to lead us to somewhere more defined, indeed to someone. All these people, skeptics just like you and me, who showed up to our church during the series where we explored the questions in this book, didn't just come and then leave. They stayed. I believe this is because Christianity answered their questions and their longings better than anything else. They saw that it presents a rational and distinct view of origins, meaning, morality, and destiny beyond any other worldview, religious or secular, in the marketplace of ideas. That the Bible, Jesus, and everything else that orbits around Christianity actually holds up under historical, scientific, philosophical, and even literary scrutiny. And when they realized this, they were willing to give their lives to it. So, this book emerges out of the intersection of these two worlds, my skeptical life and my skeptical church, the questions I have asked myself and the questions of real people, like you, who I am reaching out to every day, the best I know how, do have answers. There is hope. There is meaning to it all. If you have the courage to doubt your doubts, to suspend your disbelief, even for a moment, there is a possibility you will see something really is on the other side of the veil. And in coming to see that, I believe you will experience the same transformative reality that I and so many others have, forever changing your life. End of the introduction.